Hello, my good friends. Mike Shreeve here, founder and head troublemaker of the No Pants Project. You're listening to episode 18 of the No Pants Show. We're going to be talking about podcast experiment results, day 18. Before we dive into the revenue numbers, how many people have watched the podcast, the views, all that kind of stuff, before I dive into the 4 lessons I've learned, I want to give you some context behind the hypothesis of this experiment, because I imagine a lot of people didn't realize that I was in the middle of an experiment. They just thought, oh, Mike started a podcast. But I wanted to test some stuff out. I wanted to make some mistakes. I wanted to find out what was real and not just what a bunch of people said on, some blog somewhere so they could get clicks on their video or whatever and make people think they know what they're talking about, and etc. It's one of the things you have to do on the internet, is make sure that you test everything yourself to see what's real and what isn't real. And that means everything positive and everything negative. So anytime someone says the sky is falling, I usually go test and frankly find out the sky isn't falling at all. But also the reverse is true. Somebody says this is the greatest thing ever, you make $1 million overnight, go test it and see. I will say that so far podcasting has been very profitable for us after only 18 days of doing it. Not nearly as profitable, however, as our email. I'm not terribly surprised. Most people would, it's fairly well known in the world of marketing and selling things online that email is has a better ROI, a more established ROI than nearly any other marketing channel in terms of time and energy and money invested. But the basic hypothesis of this podcast was I already successfully do the daily email, right? That's a core component of my business. It is everyone from Gary Vaynerchuk to the Daily Stoic to et cetera, believes that frequency is key to surviving in 2019. I believe last I heard Gary V has a team of 21 people that help him to distribute, I believe it's 85 pieces of content every single day. And he continues to say that that's not enough. Now, granted, Gary V is, trying to be a billionaire, so take that in stride. You don't need to be out there making 85 pieces of content. So if that's true, and lots of people way smarter than me have done many experiments about how frequency is important and daily connection with your audience is important. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, the way I do daily email is not a pitch fest every single day. My goal is to build an email list of people who want what I can help them with, and then to give them value every single day. And then at the end of the email say, hey, if you'd like some more of this, let me try and help you in some other way. Maybe a paid way. Maybe you become my client, or et cetera and et cetera. So it's a very ethical, value-first process, because the inbox, most people still view the inbox as a very almost sacred space of their internet experience. It's not like, say, YouTube or Facebook or whatever, where they kind of let it all hang out and they don't mind too much if stuff that they don't want to see pops in their newsfeed. But if something pops in their inbox that they don't want to see, they lose their mind. So we still have to make sure that it's value first, that we serve and we earn our ability to be in someone's inbox. If somebody stays on your email list and they're seeing your emails every single day, it's only a matter of time before they become your client. Now, that's the basic premise of how I run my various businesses on the back of that very simple model. But I wanted to add podcasting for a scientific reason, which is not that long ago, I read a study which the sum of the study is basically the written word has very serious limitations in terms of its potential ability to reach maximum communication effectiveness. Okay, that was a very long-winded way of saying body language is as powerful, if not more powerful, than someone reading a word. on a page or reading a sentence. So for example, if somebody looks at you very angrily and it looks like they're about to punch you, the message is pretty loud and clear. However, it's easy to get mistaken when you read something, the meaning behind it. Okay, so words, as much as I love them and have devoted my life for the past 10 years to be a professional wordsmith, they have their limits without additional context. As human beings, we still spend most of our time communicating most of our messages outside of print. So if that's true, and science seems to be fairly certain, and, kind of like, hey, it's pretty obvious that this is true, I, for a while, considered, well, maybe I should just start doing the Facebook Live every single day. And many of you even remember me, I think a year ago, I tried to do it. I did it for 10 days or something. And then I tried again this year. The problem is, to create good video is a very time and resource expensive process. Not to create video, but to create good video. You need to have the right lighting, you need to have the right cameras, you need to have the right editing, you need to etc. and etc. So you got to have an editor, because I'm not going to edit. I don't have time to edit, and I don't really want to worry about combing my hair and looking good, and am I wearing the right shirt, and am I in the right location, and etc. and etc. and etc. So on the one hand, I knew that writing emails was only reaching a certain number of people. Really, I was really only reaching the people who like to read, or who were compelled enough to read my copy. Which for 99% of you who are trying to get clients is more than enough. Right? If you only need 3 to 5 clients paying you $2,000 to $5,000 a month, you don't need to worry about, am I maximizing every last person in the market? However, for the No Pants Project, which is a scaled service, meaning we are trying to make 7 figures or more per year. We do need 30, 40, 50 people to join our programs every single month. I realized the daily email had limitations in that context. So, knowing that, and knowing that video is really the most powerful way to communicate, because it includes body language, it includes tonalities, it includes, raising and lowering your voice, and being able to speed up words and slow words down, I had to come to a kind of middle conclusion. I wanted more benefits than the written word, but I didn't want to have to get into video production. I have clients who do video production, and, to be totally frank, I'm kind of spoiled when it comes to video production, in that, I have clients who pay $25,000 for a single day in a studio. So that's my measurement for the past 5, 6, 7 years specifically. That's what to me is a good video, right? So you can imagine flipping on a Facebook Live, it's very difficult internally for me to be happy with that process. Now, someday maybe I'll also get there, but I needed something that would work now. Also, I needed something that I could, as easily as possible, create additional communication sort of touch points. In other words, I wanted to become more intimate with my audience. And again, it's one of the things that you lose in the written word is a certain level of intimacy. Now, of course, you get to hear people's thoughts and you get to connect with them in that way, but there's something about hearing someone's voice or seeing their face that is a certain kind of intimacy and connection and trust that you can't always get with the written word. So podcasting, this is sort of to explain why podcasting. Podcasting for me is that balance between writing on one end and video on the other. I get the tonality, meaning I get to use it as a tool. I get to use speeding up, slowing down. I get to use non-polished words or non-polished sentences which can, and in and of itself, create trust. Meaning, oh, Mike's someone like me, he made a mistake, he made a goof, like all of those things increases intimacy. So that's the basic hypothesis of the podcast, that by adding voice to the mix, in addition to my daily email, I could increase my connection with my audience, build trust, and see what happens as a result in terms of sales. I'm happy to report that the hypothesis seems to be true, and that adding additional podcasts has in fact increased some trust levels and revenue. Okay, so we've been doing the podcast, so that's why I've done it. Just in case you're wondering whether you should apply it to your business right now, that's the basic premise of what podcasting has done for us. Now, of course, additionally, podcasting is an additional channel. When we're getting on iTunes, there are going to be people finding these podcasts. Yes, of course, also, as of this date, once I finish this podcast, we could have nearly 15, 16, 17, 18 hours of pre-sales material that people can go through before they ever buy something from me to determine whether or not, I know what I'm talking about and I can help them, and etc. All the things that we've all talked about, but the basic hypothesis of podcasting over anything else was just, it's super simple. Like if you listen to the podcast episode that I did the other day, where it's one of our first podcasts of how to start a podcast with a cell phone and 3 free apps, that's still how I'm running the podcast, likely how I will run the podcast forever. It takes me 5 minutes. I get an idea, write it down, get in my closet, turn this on. You don't have no idea what I look like. I'm wearing a sweatpant pajamas and like a fuzzy thing, definitely not video worthy at the moment. So this is what I love about podcasting. So we've done 18 episodes so far. It takes me about 90 minutes per day on average to create these episodes. The reason it takes me 90 minutes, one, because some of the episodes are an hour long, which I'm trying to work on reducing how long they are. That's a whole nother topic. But also, after I create the episode, yes, it's super easy. I just press a few buttons, type in my description, upload it to anchor.fm. But the problem is that after that happens, I spend another 20 minutes or so uploading the podcast to YouTube and Facebook, because I want it to be distributed around in all sorts of different forms, trying to get some traction in other places. Okay, so it's taking me about 90 minutes. Now, if you compare that to the 15 to 20 minutes a day that I'm spending on creating the daily email, and knowing what our ROI is on the daily email, already out of the gates, the podcast is not nearly as efficient as the daily email. So the podcast has nowhere near the conversions that our email list normally does. Obviously, it's early days and there's a lot of tweaking I need to do and figuring out how to create better podcast episodes. With shorter, is it longer? Still a lot of experimenting I need to do. We've only been doing this for 18 days. But so far, just that fact alone is something for me to consider. Because if you combine 90 minutes plus the daily email, I'm now spending about 2 hours a day marketing my business, which is a lot of time if lifestyle is a concern, right? Because look, Gary Vee, 85 pieces of content a day. I actually think that's incredible, right? That's amazing. And I'm putting in some things, which I'll be talking about here in a little bit, that allows us to turn these podcasts into even more pieces of content to get even more out there. And I think that's amazing and awesome. But Gary Vee's also trying to become a billionaire. I'm not trying to become a billionaire. I actually just want to work as little as possible. So this is something to consider. Something I've learned over the past 18 days is that the podcast is significantly more time resource dependent than the daily email. And in and of itself, that means by definition, there's a lower ROI. Even if the podcast sold the same as the email, the fact that the email takes me 15 to 20 minutes versus the fact that the podcast takes me an hour and a half. So that's something worth noting. Now let's talk a little bit about the numbers. 5,404 total plays is how many Anchor is reporting. Anchor FM is the app that I'm using to create this podcast. That app, so that 5,404 number is coming from iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and all the other little distribution centers for the podcast. So there's a lot of that's where that number comes from. And then we have 317.9 plays per episode. We'll talk a little bit about those numbers specifically, how we got there, what we're doing, etc. But I also want to point out that these numbers do not include Facebook or YouTube. And it also doesn't include a third thing, which I'll explain here in a second. But remember, when I take these episodes, I distribute them to Facebook and YouTube. To learn how to do that, again, check out the podcast episode that I did a while back, how to create a podcast with a cell phone and 3 free apps. Those free apps are what helped me to turn them into videos, Canva, and all that kind of stuff. Creating the static image and putting it out there. So it doesn't include those numbers, that 5,404. But more importantly, it also doesn't include what has turned out to be a very profitable use of the podcast, which is once I distribute the podcast to Facebook, I actually take that post that's on our page and I don't boost the post. I actually go into the ads manager and I turn it into an ad, and I spend about $20 to $30 per day optimized for video views, because the podcast has now been turned into a video. And what that does is that then takes that video and it's going out into the world and it's value first, and then I just retarget people who watch that video. And by retargeting the people who watch that video with, invitations to watch the case study, sign up to my email list, etc., I've actually found our average cost per lead, meaning how much it costs to get a lead, has gone from about $8 per lead, which is where we were at scale, to about $2 per lead. And the beautiful thing is that every single time I sit down to create another podcast episode, I've now created another asset which can be used in the retargeting process. Now, to keep in mind, I'm telling you guys all of this out of just complete transparency, not because I think you should necessarily go try this. So for those of you who are in any of my programs and you're some of my students, do the basic stuff first. So build your email list first, get your email working before you jump into all of this stuff, because there's a lot of advanced things that have to go on, and it requires a lot more testing. So a lot of the podcasts I run at $20 to $30 a day, they didn't make any money, so I had to cut them, and it was just... Anyway, so the point is I'm trying to make here is I'm being totally open and transparent, not anticipating any particular audience listening to this. So please use your best judgment in whether or not you should apply these principles as well. But the cool thing about that is that because I'm distributing it that way, $20, $30 a day on Facebook, some of the earlier episodes, which have now been running for about 2 weeks, they one of our episodes has 10,000 views. So that's pretty cool to me, that with a little bit of Facebook love, you can get 10,000 views on a single episode. So again, once these podcast episodes are created, they are now assets that you can use and just put everywhere on the internet, which is really, really, really cool. Okay, so in order to get those numbers, the 5,404 total plays and the 317 plays per episode, we've only sent it to our email list twice. So with a direct email, at the time of this recording, the email I sent this morning was a direct email to the email list. So what that means is that we are definitely underutilizing our email list and generating these numbers. We could probably double those numbers if I start to integrate the podcast itself into maybe doing it 2 or 3 times a week. Right now, I wanted to run them separately in a big way so that I could see what does a baseline look like for what it is that we're doing. Okay, so I got my baseline number, and now at around day 18, I'm going to really start pumping the email list with this content, because I think it's good content. I think it's very helpful. And then I really want to start to make the shift, because right now, most of those 5,404 views are the circle of influence I already have, which is to say, my immediate circle of people who already know me, who already like me, and who already trust me. That's where most of those 5,000 views come from. Again, what I want from the podcast is not just to create the intimacy with my email list, but if I can also get, to say, for example, iTunes ranking well enough that in and of itself, it also generates a separate form of traffic. Same with YouTube, same with Facebook. If I can take this one piece of content and distribute it in such a way that it in and of itself becomes a traffic generating tool, then what I get to do is double dip on the ROI, and now we're starting to see bigger, better results from that 90 minutes, right? So now it's not just 90 minutes to build intimacy and make sales, it's now 90 minutes a day spent, which includes a bunch of traffic being generated, eyeballs, branding, etc., which is ultimately what we're looking for. Okay, so from those emails, and I should be clear, we've put links in many emails, but there's only been 2 emails which have been like, hey, go listen to this episode, end of email, right? And so what this would be considered is a soft launch of the podcast. We haven't done a, hey guys, the podcast is live, let's go, here's a bunch of prizes if you leave a review, and like all that kind of stuff. I don't know if I ever will do that. I'm not really into hard launches. I know there's definitely benefits from it. I used to do it for my clients all the time, but it's a very stressful event. I'm really, as I get older and more lazy, I'm very much into the slow drip kind of, let's see what happens organically and naturally as we grow over time. So let's talk about the money numbers. We have generated 6 leads directly from the podcast, which is to say someone listened to the podcast outside of our email list and said, this is an awesome podcast. What can you do business-wise? Which is to say, they became not just an email list lead, but an actual lead, meaning they filled out an application to work with me and the No Pants project. And we anticipate between those 6 people and our sort of average close rate, we'll likely see between $3,000 and $15,000 in sales closed, which is pretty good. It's still really good, right? You think about, okay, 18 days ago, we didn't even have a podcast. We're now looking at, potentially closing $6,000 to $15,000. Now, the problem is, of course, if you break that down to 90 minutes a day, for me, that doesn't make financial sense, especially since I've got a team that is involved in the No Pants and et cetera and et cetera. So when I see those numbers, it's very exciting and very cool, but I do, my goal is to do much, much better than that. I believe over time, in 6 months, that it will get to that point. So again, those of you who are considering podcasting, this is what I'm talking about when I say, make sure you get your basics done. An email list, if that was our result after 18 days of an email, well, sure. You guys can actually go, you can go see the ROI of email in one of the podcasts that I did where I talk about $131,000 in whatever it was, 45 days. Right? So email is way more profitable. That's why I recommend that you do that first. It's from time ROI, but also actual dollars generated. But again, I'm trying to play the long game here with the podcast. I believe in 6 months, it will be significantly better. I don't think it'll beat email. I'll be happily surprised if it does, but I do think it will. It's not quite there yet. Okay. Let's talk about some lessons learned through this process. I think that's very, very important. Lesson number 1 is that even though I've been doing this world of content creation, making stuff online, self-doubt, man, self-doubt, you just cannot get away from it. Every single episode, throughout the recording of the episode, I am second guessing. Are they going to like this? Is this the thing that I want? Is this, et cetera, and et cetera. I have 5,404 views over 18 days. Average views or listens or plays, I think it's plays. So the average number of times someone clicks the play button for each episode is about 317. To me, that's not that great, right? So this is I'm telling you this. When we post it on Facebook or we post it on YouTube and it doesn't go viral, right? I know this sounds crazy saying it out loud, but when 150 people don't just absolutely love it and shower me with praise and say, this is the best thing that I've ever heard and all these sorts of things, that doesn't go away. So whether you have 2 people listening to your podcast or 300 listening per episode, I'm sharing this with you as a lesson because that feeling doesn't go away. Waiting for a point in time where you're somehow, quote unquote, confident enough with yourself that's all malarkey, to be totally honest. If you are actually honest with yourself and you're actually trying to help people and you're actually trying to make something that is worth someone's time to listen to and to consume, and you actually want to transform their life and you actually want to make their life better, self-doubt it's natural. I would say it's probably a kind of good thing, because otherwise, if you're just out there wasting people's time and you just think everything that comes out of your mouth is gold, maybe there's a problem with you. Maybe you have some narcissism issues or something like that. But what I've also found is that self-doubt can be crippling, and that's when it's bad. So I don't think questioning yourself and examining what you're creating is a bad thing. I think that's part of the creative process. But if you let it become a hurdle to creation, then it is a bad thing. And one of the tools that I've used that has been so helpful has been my wife. So an accountability partner that I trust. So I've not only been creating this podcast over the past 18 days, but I've been creating this podcast at a time in our lives where this is probably the worst possible time for me to be devoting 90 minutes a day to this thing. And the reasons for that are personal, but just to say there are probably other things within my businesses that I could be focusing on, but I've chosen to play this long game with podcasting. And like I said, when I think about when podcasting is going to finally pay off, I'm thinking like 6 months to a year down the road when I have 150 or 300 episodes, right? So again, this is why I'm saying do daily email first. This is a long play. But being able to have someone else who is aware that that's what I'm trying to do, aka my wife, has been very helpful when, like a human being, I want to play the short game. I want the results now, and looking at a podcast knowing that it's not going to pay off tomorrow, and why do I want to do it, and what's the point of it, and it's 90 minutes, and they're not even going to like it, and I don't have anything smart to say, and when all these feelings and things happen, my wife being there and being like, well, are you going to do it tonight? And helping me to get it done at the exact same time every day, and etc. That is why I've done 18 episodes in 18 days. It has not been easy to show up every single day. And this is coming from a guy who, for the past 10 years, well, 8 years really, eight-ish years, for the past 8 years has done a daily email. So I'm used to showing up and creating content every day, but the podcast was new. It's a new process, new doubts, etc. So having that accountability partner is critical. One of the best episodes that personally I'm the proudest of was, I believe it was yesterday's, which is the advice I would give to my son or advice I'd give to a business owner. You may not like it necessarily, but it's one that I'm very proud of that I created. I almost just didn't make that post or that podcast, except that my accountability partner, my wife, was like, no, you really need to give it a shot. You really need to just go in there without a script. I didn't have a script for that one. There's been 2 or 3 where I don't have a script in terms of I don't have an outline and I just go shoot from the hip, because that's all I can muster for that episode. I just got to get something out and get it done and get it posted and move on. So the point that I'm trying to make here is having an accountability partner, that's what fixes all the internal stuff. And no matter what level you are at, you'll still have that internal stuff. And I've seen, and I know this to be true, I'm not saying like I'm at some high level, but when I work with my clients who are at high levels, who are at the top, like there's no one higher than them in what they do, they still also have that same just human insecurity and human desire for people to approve of what they do, and human desire to make something that people will like and that will serve people, and I believe a deep, honest, true concern that what they're creating does actually help. So that's the first lesson, is that self-doubts will not go away. And a good support person, a good accountability person is invaluable. Second lesson is about listening, specifically listening to the signals. So unfortunately, the data that I'm collecting so far from podcasting isn't like the data in the Facebook ads dashboard. So in Facebook ads dashboard, I can see who's looking at my stuff, what devices they're looking at, how many seconds of a video they've watched. Like I can find out so much about the people who are interacting with my stuff. What I have so far, and I'm not even sure I'm even at the point yet where I need to get deeper than this, but what I have so far is Anchor FM's dashboard, which tells me how many total plays I've had and how many plays I'm getting per episode, and it pulls all of that data from the iTunes and Spotify and all of my connected accounts. So it's podcast wide, how many plays am I getting? And it does break it down so I can see how we're doing on iTunes and how we're doing on Spotify and etc. It doesn't tell me what YouTube, it doesn't tell me on Facebook, and it doesn't tell me my Facebook ads, but it is a metric enough that I can look at the different podcast episodes that I've created, and I can see which ones have done well and which ones have flopped. I have one podcast episode right now that has 47 views, and I have and that's my lowest one, and my best one has something like 1,255 views or something like that. Those numbers tell me what people want to hear and what they don't want to hear. And then I can create more content based off of the stuff that people want to hear. So what that means is when I'm doing this daily stuff, it's not about, oh, I have to come up with another idea today. Instead, it's let's see what they like and let's make some more of that. Now, that isn't always a foolproof process. For example, the episode that is doing the best right now, the 1255 views episode, is the one where I talk about making $12,500 a month and what that service is. This very next day, I did a podcast episode about applying that service for myself, so kind of a different business model, and the 7 lessons I learned making $131,000 in 45 days, which was a breakdown of a case study, of a live over-the-shoulder case study kind of thing that I did for some people a while back, that one only had like 300 views. And we even promoted that one to the email list as well. So they were both promoted to the list. So it's all learning. It's all sort of like a little learning machine where inputs come in and I watch what's working, so that when I'm spending my 90 minutes creating the piece of content, I'm creating the stuff that the audience wants to hear, because ultimately that's what I'm here to do, is serve the audience. That's why I'm creating this content, is to help people. So what I'm doing is I'm listening to what they're saying about what is or isn't helpful. Every time someone comments on one of our, like on Facebook or YouTube, the first question I ask is, what more would you like to hear? I want them, if people are taking the time out of their day to comment on something, those are the people I want to serve. So that's what I mean by listening, and how powerful that is as a process. And what you'll see is that I have I did two other ones, 21 ways to attract clients, and then something like 14 ways to stand out in a crowded market. Both of those have not been promoted to the email list directly, but they have both performed really well organically, which is to say those people who check the podcast regularly, either subscribed in iTunes or subscribed in Spotify or on Anchor or whatever, they really, really liked those podcasts. Maybe they clicked play a couple of times because it had so much information. That's what I'm trying to do with this podcast, so I can take that information and run with it. Number 3, the thing that I've learned is, like most life lessons, or really the big life lesson, is that it never goes as planned. I can't tell you how many times I've sat down, like for this example, for this podcast episode, we're 37 minutes in. I told myself I was going to keep this under 15. Also, it took me 4 tries to finally get in the rhythm, meaning I clicked play, or I clicked record, and I started talking 2 minutes in. I was like, this is ridiculous. Tried it again, 5 minutes in, ridiculous. Tried it again, 1 minute in, ridiculous. Okay, finally on the 4th try, I got it. Right? That is not uncommon. Additionally, as much as I listen and as much as I try to predict what piece of content is going to do well, it never goes as planned. Like, I'm the one creating this. I've been doing this for 10 years, and even I wouldn't bet money. I would not bet my own money on a piece of content, how it's going to perform compared to the other pieces. Now, that's a good thing. This is a good lesson to learn, because when you learn that it never goes to plan, and this is like nearly everything in life, right? When you learn that it never goes to plan, or never goes according to plan, you can stop worrying about it. You can just let it go. I'm creating this podcast. This podcast is going to be what it's going to be, meaning this episode specifically. Some people are going to love it. Some people are going to hate it. I hope more people love it than hate it. What I really hope is that more people love it or hate it than just feel apathetic about it. But that's a discussion for another time about polarity. But you have to let go of perfection. You have to let go of trying to predict whether something is going to work, and instead get into the mode of, what am I going to try today? What am I going to experiment with today? I'm 18 days into this podcast. I'm about 3 to 4 days away from scientifically being in a habit, which is to say, much research has shown that at about 21 days of doing something again and again and again, it becomes a habit. I can already feel myself. I'm not quite there yet, but I can feel myself getting to a point where it's really easy to just show up and do it, just like any habit that you have. It's really easy. If you bite your fingernails as a habit, do you know it's really easy to bite your fingernails? You don't think about it. It just happens automatically. This is the power of habit. So this is where I'm at almost. I got there by just being outcome independent and just showing up every single day. And what will happen is over time, I will get better. I've already seen a difference from the first episode to this episode. I've already seen a difference in the structure of knowing what people want. In 6 months from now, this podcast is going to be amazing. In a year from now, I can't wait. In 5 years from now, I hope I have a podcast like Joe Rogan where I'm interviewing people in person. And they're like absolutely incredible people. Like interviewing my personal heroes. For now, though, I'm going to do it like this. Because I'm not there yet. I'm not 5 years in the future. I'm here right now, today, doing this podcast episode for you as best as I possibly can. With the limited knowledge that I have. So, number 3, it never goes to plan. And that's okay. And then number 4, this is the most important thing. That I've relearned again. When I very first started, I wanted to just make podcast episodes and then have someone come in and turn them into all sorts of cool stuff and 57 different pieces of content and try to do the Gary Vee thing and et cetera, and et cetera. But instead, I did it first myself. So I'm creating this podcast, I distributed it to Facebook, I distributed it to YouTube, and I built a system to where I could get it kicked out and distributed and created for Facebook and YouTube in like 15, 20 minutes, which is a long time, but it's not a long time. So it's 15 to 20 minutes more than I want to be devoting to it, but it's only 15 or 20 minutes. So what's really cool about that is I developed a system starting tonight. This is the first episode that this is going to happen for. I'm not going to distribute it myself, right? I have a member of our team who I showed how I do it. She's going to be able to take it and do it perfectly, and I don't have to worry about it. So there are layers to this as well, though. So as I continue to create this podcast, there's going to be other elements where now that I have her doing Facebook and YouTube, I might try some other things. What are we going to do about LinkedIn? How are we going to put it here? What are we going to put there? And I'm going to do it first before I outsource. Now, this is really, really important for a lot of new business people because they think you should outsource first and then maybe do it later. But honestly, when you're building a business, the very best thing that you can do is actually build it first and outsource later. So build first, outsource later. So that's what I highly, highly recommend. And just another reaffirmation that that's the best way to do things when you grow your business. Okay, my friends, so that's it for me for episode 18, podcast experiment results, some lessons, and what we've learned so far on day 18. Hopefully this was helpful, a little insight into what the results of podcasting are, whether it's something you should do. Who knows, maybe you are so much better at podcasting than me that you could double or triple your results. I don't know, but hopefully double, like you look at what I achieved and you think, wow, I could get like 3 to 5 times that. Maybe that's true. And hopefully this episode showed you and was transparent enough for you to be able to make that call or not. If for those of you who are kind of in the early stages of your business, I don't know that I'd necessarily recommend podcasting straight away. Certainly not a daily podcast straight away. Maybe weekly to supplement some of your daily emails, but make sure that you focus and maintain getting that email list up and running, because I'll tell you, if I didn't have an email list, I know for a fact I would not have gotten 5,404 plays. Okay, so that's the real big takeaway that I hope that you're taking away here from today. Otherwise, it seems so far to be working really, really well. Again, really looking forward to 6 months, a year from now, and improving this process. So that's it for me. My name is Mike Shreeve. I am the founder and head troublemaker of the No Pants Project, and you have been listening to episode 18 of the No Pants Show.